My mentor considered Jesus Christ an avatar, and he defined an avatar as somebody who could hold the entire universe within their chest and in their heart, another way to say it. And that was always really compelling to me because I always thought of that as compassion, because I've always connected Jesus as compassion and being able to feel the pain, compassion being able to feel the pain, the actual act of feeling the pain of somebody else. And in my experience, that's hard because that was really what I wanted to understand when I was always compelled towards Jesus' mission and what he said because I could see compassion and he was well beyond what I was capable of because I had all these judgments about people and how could I love and feel bad for somebody or feel their grief if I'm in judgment. It's impossible. So I had to learn to remove those and those kind of to me those are barriers from connecting to empathy and then using empathy to experience compassion. But on the other side of that is, or one thing that I've evolved to understanding about empathy, and if you were this avatar, is that you also get to experience other people's joy. There's a Sanskrit word called mudita, which is that aspect. So empathy to me is the intangible lines that take us to compassion and joy, experiencing joy of other people. I've been listening to an audiobook on sociopaths, and the science behind it is that basically a sociopath is somebody that does not have a conscience. A sociopath does not necessarily mean that somebody's out there to be a psychopath or to kill people. They will just go about doing their thing, not connecting with other human beings. So if they like reading books, they'll just read books and go about their day. They'll meld into society just fine, and they can even meld into some social circles just because people assume that they feel the same way as everybody else. So that got me thinking about this idea that we have in our um, popular idea of psychology is so if we look at the two ends of the spectrum, we've got the avatar over here, and we have the sociopath. Basically, one's completely connected, and the other one's completely not connected. And so that got me thinking about, well, first of all, the staticness of the diagnosis of being a sociopath to me is kind of what we do. We love to categorize things and then freeze them so that we feel good about it. And what I mean by that is, let's just say there's 10% of the population exactly. And so let's say there's no births or deaths. That means that none of those 10 can ever feel any type of connection with conscience. And then let's just go on to the other side of that there's probably people that have very little access, but they still wouldn't be considered a sociopath because they do have some access. And then there's people that are born with just this massive amount of empathy for other people. And empathy is difficult. So that brings up the idea of nature versus nurture. Was I just um, born with a certain amount of empathy or ability to feel compassion? And I'm going to say that perhaps, but I can tell you that during my life, I can look back over it, and there were so many times and so much, or the way that I was thinking and the way that my life, the paradigm that I was living through, I was not accessing empathy the way that I wanted to be able to um, access empathy. And I would just say that shows like in my politics. My politics were kind of about me and people like me. And so if this thing called empathy is just there or it's not there, um, I wouldn't have ever gone through that stage. And as what I believe has progressed and evolved towards more of the avatar. I'm not saying I'm an avatar, by any means, but I am saying that I can now feel and be concerned with and open myself to compassion from people that are in my circle, that they're just human, that, just human beings, and that, I have compassion for the people who don't have compassion, access to compassion. And as I've experienced and worked on the concept of empathy, I've learned that there's also a concept called mudita. So we've got compassion, which is feeling somebody's grief, but there's also mudita, which is experiencing other people's joy. And it's the same thing, is that we can, it started here, and then, it expands and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so now I can experience the joy of, people anywhere. And so we can get a real. So I would say that what I would, as a message about empathy, is that empathy is a concept, but a concept that can move us to experiencing more of this world. And experiencing further, further, further out the idea of compassion. The way that I would describe my experience has been, as I've learned compassion. Compassion is very difficult, by the way. If you truly feel others' grief, you have to experience it. So what they're feeling in your body, you're feeling in your body. You're feeling that rigidness. You're feeling the anxiety go up. You're feeling all of these things. And what I have found through my practice of doing this and being willing to do this, it's difficult. It's like running, it's really difficult at first. And then as you keep running and you keep doing it, you keep building up. And what I consider is that I built up a vessel to be able to hold grief. And I also don't process grief the way that I once did either. So I don't just walk in a supermarket and feel everybody's grief and then I'm wiped. It's that I built this kind of a psychological or spiritual muscle to be able to do this. And to me, it's more of just a vessel to be able to hold space for that energy. And so empathy can be, to me, absolutely, there may be some aspect of each of us being individuals. So we came in with more or lesser ease in finding empathy than other people, but that doesn't mean that we're a static being and that we can't progress and become and give more back to the collective altogether. Difficulties, on the side, on one side you've got the sociopath that may have been born with this natural disconnection from the conscience, but you got to look at the other side too. That there's people born with easy access to it, and I have met them personally, and it's difficult. I know the process for myself. I got to do it in my own time. With what I had, what access I had, and what was conditioned by my culture, and then what I had to practice myself. But I've met people who have just this natural connection to empathy, but then they go around and they experience people's grief, and then when it comes to grief, when you feel that grief, you love, like you want to be loved and nurtured when you're feeling that, and we don't live in that world. We live in a much more dense environment on Earth. And so the difficulty for those people is a lot.